Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am Courtney Anderson, and as always, I am so happy that you have taken time to join me today and be part of our program, our show. And so we are here, of course, focusing on what can we do to meet, and more importantly than that, surpass our goals. Once we surpass our goals, how can we sustain the fact that we have surpassed our goals? That's what we're all about. And while we're doing that, how do we feel? How do we feel about it? And that's, of course, the issue where we focus on practicing the joyful art of business, because we know it's not enough just that, oh, okay, yeah, I got a promotion, I was hired, I earned more income, yay, all right, but how do you feel? Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you miserable? Because you are a multifaceted person and you have a lot of different things that go into making your entire life surpass your goals, right? So what we're doing here is we are doing one of our shows that is part of our HR Heroes Hangout series. And of course, our HR heroes are our human resources heroes. And this is a series that I am so honored to have been part of and sharing with the human resources community, with human resource professionals, human resource students, and people who just admire and appreciate human resources. We don't have to be an HR hero to take part in the HR Heroes Hangout. That's why it's open to all people who again, are aware of, appreciate, are interested in, admire, look up to our HR heroes. So human resources, of course, is the fundamental part of any organization, whether it's for-profit or non-profit. And the idea, of course, is I need to get stuff done at my organization, right? Maybe I'm trying to eradicate malaria. Maybe I'm trying to sell a certain amount of television sets. I don't care what it is. I have goals. I need to meet and surpass those goals, right? And I need to get stuff done. And at some level, at least with the technology we have today, to the best of our knowledge, I'm going to need some humans. I'm going to need some humans in there. Now, how many humans I need depends on what I'm trying to do and what type of industry I'm in, what type of technology exists. Some industries there are less humans than other species. Maybe you're working with different types of animals. Maybe you are part of a zoo. So there maybe humans aren't even the majority of the beings. But there are going to be a few humans, because at this point, to the best of our knowledge, I always make those caveats. People sometimes say, well, that seems just really silly. Are you insulting people? And I actually had that, because I make the same type of caveats when I give speeches, right? And my point is no. First of all, I don't know everything, and I don't pretend to. So there may be some place that exists right now that has 0 humans that work there. It could be all robots. I don't know. So the other thing is I don't know what the future holds. So maybe, tomorrow or 10 years from now, we'll look back on this and someone would say, oh, she was so stupid. She just talked about humans like they were so necessary. Well, that's why I make the caveats, right? A, I don't know everything that exists right now, and B, I have no clue what's going to happen tomorrow and later today. So that's why I do that, and it's habit. It's how I think. So unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, all I can do when I'm writing and researching and speaking and having this show and our video television show, the other version of this program, Solutions with Courtney Anderson, it's based on how I see the world and process information. So I'm gonna do what I'm sort of wired to do, which is, in my head, I always think, well, you don't know that to be 100% certain. So that's why I make some of my little caveats. But human resources, of course, is about the idea, and we call it humans. Who knows, again, what in the future we may call it. But I need to get stuff done, and I'm going to need to be able to manage people. They may be people who are internal employees. They may be executives. They may be somebody who works as a contractor or a temporary team member. So human resources is there to help sort of be the center, the brain of this whole thing, right? And help us figure out what's going on with all these humans. I gotta get them to get stuff done. I gotta hire them. I have to retain them. I have to take care of them while they are current employees. Are there any benefits? Are there promotions? Is there recognition? Oh my goodness, what part of the world do I live in? What are the legal requirements in terms of safety, in terms of employment requirements and processes. So there's a lot to do. I got to evaluate my employees. I have to sometimes, hopefully, in an ideal world, we would never have a separation, right? It's almost like when we talk about outside of work with a relationship, in an outside of work relationship, like people who got married, right? We would hopefully never have divorce because we would make the right decision for us when we enter into our marriage. So we never ideally would ever want to talk about divorce. I believe that's my personal opinion. Sometimes in life we thought we made a good decision, but we didn't have all the data. Sometimes in life things happen, and divorce is something that does happen. And so what we're trying to do, of course, is minimize those types of situations. Taking us back to work, talking about our HR heroes, we're going to try to minimize any type of separation, right? We're going to try to minimize anyone being the word even, people get uncomfortable, terminated or fired or let go. We don't want that to happen. So our HR heroes have all this to do to try to get stuff done and managing all the people, getting people on board, keeping people, making sure ideally that people have good evaluations and a process in place so that we don't ever have to let anyone leave our employee. We also want to make sure that we have tools to support our team members, right? If we have an idea that we'd like someone to improve in a certain area, are we providing that for them? Additional skills and training and support, and what are we doing also for the whole person? What if someone has an illness or has something happen where they're not able to perform their work task at this exact moment? Or what kind of opportunities do we have for our team members who are contributing to continue to contribute, big picture, long term? It's a lot. That's why we look up to HR heroes. Specifically in this show, of course, we're dealing with a title that our title says, whose side is HR really on? Employer or employee? Whose side is HR really on? Employer or employee? And I know, because I've had dialogue about these types of issues in other settings, people would say to me, is this a trick question? Let's say I'm working with human resources on site for a corporate education program. People, and if I brought the subject up, which I have, which is one of the reasons why it's on the show list, something that I've addressed in my professional service to my client organizations. And they'll say, well, what do you mean by that? That's a trick question, right? And some people will say, oh, well, clearly we're on the side of the employer, right? The employer pays us, right? I mean, we work here too, and so that's whose side we are. That's if you have what's called an in-house HR, so that your HR hero, let's say it's an organization, let's say it's Acme Inc., Acme Incorporated, and it just makes widgets, right? So the Acme Incorporated may go out and hire their own humans to be in their HR heroes department. And they may have that entire infrastructure where those people who are in HR who actually work for Acme. You may have a situation where people who work in HR, even though Acme Inc. is the company, you may have an employee and they're told, hey, you need to go to HR. And when they go to HR, whether it's online or video chat or even physically, the people who are in HR who talk to them or answer their questions or emails or concerns, they don't actually work for Acme Inc. They may work for another company. And they may work for a company that specializes in human resources, right? And then they sell their services and expertise to Acme Inc. So there could be in-house or out-house. Or in-house or external. Out-house sort of conjures up historical ideas of restroom facilities before we had internal plumbing in our homes. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, okay, still, is it a joke? Is this again, a trick question? Why are you asking it? It's obvious, human resources, whether they're internal employees or they're external or organization, they're going to go with the employer. That's why they're here, right? No. It isn't why they're here. They're here to help get stuff done. We talked about that. And then I started to give all these different examples of what they're doing: hiring people, retaining people, rewarding people, evaluating people, supporting people, providing opportunities for people for more growth and more training and more information. What HR is supposed to be doing is doing stuff, getting people to do stuff, ideally getting the best person to do stuff, creating an environment where they love what they're doing or at least like it enough that they're going to stay. It's retention because it's expensive to get new people. But HR actually is supposed to be the entity that's separate from the executive administrative team and separate from just management supervisory. And ideally what they're supposed to be doing is getting stuff done, but making sure we're getting it done the right way. So let's say you worked at an organization, and let's say you're an HR hero, and you're doing your job, oh, I'm doing my job, and I find out while looking through some paperwork as part of my job that it looks like some of the paperwork has been manipulated. It looks like there's been some fraud or some lies, potentially. I'm an HR hero. Whose side am I on? Am I on the employee side or the employer side? And let's just say for this fact pattern that what the HR hero sees is absolutely, totally illegal. They look at this paperwork and they say, uh-oh, I know that's not true. So whose side are they on? Do they think, oh, well, I'm on the employer side, and so I'll go along with this illegal paperwork? I won't say anything. I won't do anything. Let's say what happens when we have HR individuals who are not HR heroes. So we very rarely ever even acknowledge that people exist in HR or HRM or human resource management who aren't heroes, because of course the majority of them are, and of course everyone who's part of our programs is. But there are examples in real life. I know in my own professional experience I've encountered some people who were in HR, they were not HR heroes. What were they doing? Well, we could sit here all day long, or longer, all day. We could sit here for a year or more, who knows, maybe a decade, and just talk about examples of real-life published examples of human resource people, employees, professionals, whether they're internal employees or external, who were aware of things that were not legal, and they didn't stop it, and they didn't report it, and they didn't do anything to help the organization survive. And what happens if HR heroes just throw their hands up and say, hey, I'm on the side of the employer. Nothing I can do about it. Whatever they tell me to do. If it's fraud, I don't care. I care, but what can I do, right? Eventually what happens, organizations go out of business. And when the organization goes out of business, everybody loses, right? So if an HR hero says, well, this wouldn't be an HR hero, but if a person in HR said, oh, I'm on the employer side, whatever the employer says, I just totally agree with. The problem is some employers will have, just like we can have somebody come along in an HR profession who's not really an HR hero, you can have somebody come along in a executive leadership role. You could have somebody come along as a manager or supervisor. You could have somebody come along who makes decisions who they shouldn't have made that decision. They're not doing what the law says they should do. They're not doing the right thing, but they did it anyway. And human resources is there is another check, as another way to make sure that there's a balance of power. So if the employer is doing something that they shouldn't be doing, human resources is there to say, this is part of why you have them. Otherwise, you don't need HR in theory, right? Managers, supervisors go out and hire whoever they want to hire. Who cares what the law says? They're going to interview and hire their relatives and friends and tell them if they don't go out, and go dancing with them on Saturday night, they'll be fired. People do all kind of stuff. And the reason you ideally have a professional core of very educated experts in human resources is because there's so much legal and business knowledge, and they're also a check and balance. They're another way to make sure things are being done correctly. The HR hero knows they're not on the employer side, and to be honest, they're not on the employee side. So the employee runs to HR and says, oh my goodness, one of my coworkers who's another employee is doing horrible things. They're beating up people. They're physically hitting them, and they're stealing from their purses and their wallets. HR is to be on the side of the right thing. That's whose side they're supposed to be on. If they just sit there and they don't do anything to stop an employer or an employee from doing the wrong thing, the whole organization could suffer. And in many instances, like I said, we could talk about for days or years or decades, real-life organizations go out of business. They cease to exist because we weren't having that professional HR hero as a check and balance to make sure that we are all on the same page and that we do understand, here's some great, awesome words I love as a lawyer and someone who loves business. Policies and procedures. HR is on the side of what's the rule. That's who the side they should be on. Sometimes HR looks and says, okay, the rule says that you as a manager aren't allowed to fire someone because they refuse to tell you how handsome you are. So it's not that they're on the side of the employee, but that they're on the side of what's the rule. Many of the rules at organizations are written down by the organization. The organization makes up the majority of what they do in any world, in any part of the world. There's going to be a couple of layers the HR is looking at. Of course, anywhere you are in the world, there should be some sort of legal base that you look at work as an HR professional and say, what does the law say I have to do? That's sort of your bare minimum. And many of these laws are really named in ways to make you remember. That's the bare minimum. So, in the United States, for example, if an HR professional is wondering, how can I make sure I'm working with these managers who want to hire someone, right? We're going to hire an employee. What should we offer them for pay? Well, the first thing HR would look and do is, what's the minimum? What's the law say? Because the law tells me what I have to do, And if I don't do that, then I violated what the government says are the rules. So in the United States civil law, literally, that's referred to as, minimum wage. It's part of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is the fancier full name of the law, Fair Labor Standards Act. But that law has language in there that tells you what's the lowest amount of money you can offer to pay somebody for different types of jobs and work categories. So that's the first place to start, right? Above the law, you have this idea of organizations are entities, and they should have some ability to create their own destiny, right? Like, now I'm not going to get into in this show whether or not some organizations that happen to be classified as corporations are actually entitled to the exact same rights as humans. I'm not getting into that. That's a legal issue, and it's exciting, and we have other programs where we talk about it. But organizations are created. They're created by government, if they're a government agency. They're created by the public sector, if they're a private, non-governmental organization. Somebody created it. Somebody started it. Somebody founded this store or this television factory or this restaurant. It started somewhere. It didn't exist when the planet started. I mean, I've not seen anybody from any perspective in life who says, oh, there was a Walmart and a McDonald's and a Boeing at the beginning of the dawn of time. I mean, I've never actually seen that really argued. Somebody along the way in life started it. And many of the times that we talk about when we talk about business is we reflect on that person. We love the founder narrative, right? Especially when the founder is someone who, quote, came from nothing, right? And we've got a lot of modern examples of that where, oh, they came from nothing. We love that because the idea is that any of us could sort of sit around one day and come up with a business and boom, look at that, assuming it doesn't fail. Look at us. We're a big success. We're Richard Branson or who knows who we are. Look at our life. It's so awesome. I'm Oprah Winfrey. Look at me. I'm a big business person. Yay. Came from nothing. Somebody created it. So when you create it and it's something, you have to look at what the law says you have to do. That's your bare minimum what you have to do. But above that, you can sort of start to customize stuff however you want to do it, right? So it's sort of like outside of work. We may not all go out there and start some big, huge, successful, global business or brand, but most people at some level move out of their family of origin, their parent or guardian's care when they become an adult at some point, and they transition to their own place. They get their own apartment, they get their own flat, they get their own place. And now there's rules, right? You have to pay for your place, right? Pay your rent or mortgage. But inside your place, you kind of get to do that version of, hey, it's my house. I make the rules. So you want to decorate it with, zebra print stuff? Yeah. You want to put a beanbag in the middle of the room and make that the focal point? Sure. You decide that you don't want to have, cabinet doors because you think they're just too distracting and they hold you back from seeing your dishes, and it's your place, and you have the authority to do this. Then take them out. I mean, it's your world. You do whatever you want to inside. Now, there's rules, right? I got to pay my rent, or pay my mortgage, pay whatever, insurance or taxes in some parts of the world. There's some rules. Some parts of the world there'll be rules about noise violations. But inside my place, if I want to put disco balls and, purple dots on the wall and, I'm not going to hear it if I own it, and I want to dance around, in paper hats and tennis shoes and have a disco party in my own living room, and I'm not in violation of any law, I'm not outside bothering neighbors with my noise, and I'm not opening my windows so other people have to walk by and see me dancing inside my house. I'm doing it with my doors closed, my window closed. Then it's my world. I get to do what I want. Same thing at work. Right? We started this organization, somebody started it. And now people get to go ahead to a certain degree and decide, hey, how are we going to run it? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Are we going to put, disco balls and how are we going to do things? That's what the policies and procedures are all about. Somebody somewhere started it, or some group of people, and at some point they started figuring out, either before they started sometimes, or sometimes after they learned the hard way, meaning they didn't have the rule and then something happened that was not awesome and they thought, oh, we should make a rule. But your policies and procedures, just think of it like, hey, I'm in my place, I'm in my own apartment. I remember my first apartment I had where I didn't have a roommate and I got to pick, how am I going to put the furniture? Where do I want to sit? I can sit where I want to. I can put this cup where I want to, my place. So policies and procedures are your friend because they're great. They give you that flexibility. Maybe you thought you wanted a beanbag in the middle of the room. You realize later, you know what, maybe I need a chair. I don't know. But it's up to me. So that's why the organizations will often say in their language with their policies and procedures, subject to change. Well, of course. I'm not stuck. I made this up. I, the organization or the person, made up the rule. I can change the rule any time I want to. My rule. That's what you're dealing with. So human resources looks at the law. Hey, what's the minimum we can pay people? What are the other rules the law says about hiring? Okay, cool. Next, what do our own internal things that we made up tell us? We're going to look at our policy and procedure manual. Then I would argue, and I put in the show notes, you want to have your HR hero always does this. Your HR hero asks, all right, I know my minimum is I have to do the law. I know what my policies and procedures say that I should do, ideally, or there may not be a policy and procedure. You may look in there and there's nothing that answers the question. And the bigger question is not what the bare minimum law says I have to do, and not what my policy and procedure manual, which is my own sort of individualized guidebook to my own little business. Bigger than that, with no ceiling, right, with no limit on what you can dream and how far you can surpass your goals, the big question is, ethically, what should we do? Ethically, what should we do to if we're a nonprofit, we're trying to eradicate some, disease, what should we do? How could we do this at the level that's not even been dreamed of? So your ethics are a certain level of it's a framework for making decisions about what's right. And HR heroes, you see how complicated and awesome it is. You're never bored if you're an HR hero because you've got to keep up with laws, which are challenging because they can change too, right? The government makes a law in some way or adopts the law, and then you're enforcing the law, and then the government can change the law or change the enforcement or change part of the law. So there's a lot to keep up with. And then you have your own policies and procedures, which you have a lot more leeway as long as you're getting within those frameworks of the rules of what the law says. And then you have this bigger thing that what I talk to most of my HR corporate education clients about is ethics. How awesome can this place be? And ethically, what's the right thing to do? Not, okay, we're not in violation of the law. Okay, we followed our procedure. But let's dream ethically. Now, a lot of people think of ethics as the answer to what's the right thing. I'm not really sure. That's part of it. But I would also argue that your ethical consideration should be part of being broader with your vision for HR, not just sort of perfunctory, like, look at the law, look in the handbook, and now, okay. No, how awesome can an organization be? How many great people can we find to come work here? How can we keep them here? What can we do to unleash their creativity and innovation and their ideas? How can we make them be part of something larger than themselves? How can we help ensure people are getting that emotional return on the time they spend here? I refer to it as the joyful art of business, but, there's a lot in this. So when we ask the question, whose side is HR on? HR heroes are going to be on the side of what's the rule, what's right. Now, sometimes what the rule says and what's right are two different things, right? Somebody could be in a situation where they say, well, I looked at the rule, and this is what the rule says I have to do, but I really don't think it's the right thing to do. Well, that's an ethical-ish question, right? And we know when we look at it historically, when we look around the world, this happened all the time. People were in organizations, and then there was some rule that they personally felt, Oh my goodness gracious, that doesn't seem like the right thing. So the question then is, what framework do they have ethically? And I gave an example at the very beginning of the show, which is a much easier one. Someone does something that's illegal. It's the employer who does it. It's the CEO who's doing it. It's a high-ranking official who's doing it. And if HR just sits there and goes along with it, quietly, oh wow. Then when the whole thing falls apart or people are the media splashes the organization's name all over TV, and everybody in society is like, oh, look at those horrible, bad people. HR is culpable for that in a certain extent because they should have understood their real role. Their role isn't to be on the side of the employer or the employee. Their role is to be the side of the organization. The organization, some would say, well, that's the employer. Not necessarily. The senior leaders of the organization represent or agents of the employer. But I would argue that the entity itself should be sustained just like from the founder, whoever that founder was. Maybe they're still alive. Maybe they died, 100 years ago. The organization, if Human Resources looks at it, that's the legacy they're trying to protect, is the organization. So the employer, high-ranking agents or officers and officials, if they're not doing the right thing, if they're not following the rule, then HR needs to document that and do everything they can as assertively and aggressively as they can to stop that individual or small group of individuals from destroying the entire organization, because they do. It happens all the time. Like we said, we talk about it for, who knows how many shows we could fill with just that, sitting around talking about different things we read about in the media and court cases where one or a couple of people they destroyed a whole organization, and people suffer. Now everybody suffers, right? When the organization is ceases to exist or goes out of business, and everybody's lost their job. Families are hurt. Communities are hurt. So they're on the side of what's the rule, what's the right thing to do. It may be an employee goes to HR and has very clear, organized documentation of something that's happened that's horrible, that's happened to them. And it may have been a manager or supervisor who was engaged in part of the wrongdoing. Human Resources then is, what's the right thing to do? I'm trying to save the organization. So I got somebody here not doing what the law says, or I have somebody here not doing what our policy and procedures says. Those are the easiest ones, because and I say easy because ideally, and I'm saying this as a lawyer, right? So I understand when most people go look at laws, it seems incredibly vague and confusing, and you still don't exactly understand what it means. So there's a little bit of an extra experience I have with legal issues that gives me a little more confidence to say, you go look at what the law says. The human resources policies are usually written a little bit more clearly. I'll be very honest, in most parts of the world, that there's lawyers who are going to make the policies and procedures, they're going to vet them, they're going to make sure that sometimes they'll be involved in creating them. So they also maybe going to be written a little bit in what they call legalese. It's the language of the lawyer. But they should be clear enough for most people to understand them. And definitely the HR heroes studied them, right? That's their handbook, right? The harder part is always going to be what you should do. What's the ethics of this? So in other words, you could ask yourself, hey, ethically, if we're going to be, the best widget maker in the world, what would be the ethical thing to do? What would be the right thing to do in a situation where I've got an employee alleging one thing, I've got another slightly more senior employee alleging another thing? What's the right thing to do ethically for the big picture of the firm is the best framework to make the decision. Now, the reality is, of course, you have bullies in organizations. We do so many shows about this. You can have a bully that's like a part-time, worker who's been there for, a few months. A bully doesn't have to be somebody who's a full-time senior leader. You can have all types of power plays in organizations. That's why I spend so much of my career on the workplace relationship part, because it's not about what it looks like on paper. It's what's happening in real life between people. But an HR hero is in a department that's led by an HR hero and has peer HR heroes to support them. HR may be in situations where they're going to the senior leadership and saying, look, no, we're not going to sign off on this. We cannot do that in good conscience. It's either illegal in our estimation, or it's in violation of our policy, or we just think it's unethical. And now, is there a price to pay for that? Might individuals potentially lose their job? Sure. Are there instances where people are whistleblowers, where they say, I tried to solve it in-house, nobody would listen to me, and I went outside to the public at large? Yes. But HR has to look and answer this clearly, and this is why it's not a trick question. It's a very real issue. HR heroes need to think about and make sure they are comfortable with. You're on the side of your organization, of the entity. The entity hopefully can continue far beyond your tenure with them. And the idea that whatever the employer tells you, whatever some senior employer says, and that's a challenge though. The entity itself can't speak because it's just sort of a fictional creation, right? Maybe it's a corporation, maybe it's a government agency. It only exists in our minds. It's not to the technology that exists right now. It's not like it can't tell you. So the employer speaks through their human senior leaders. And so many HR professionals will say, well, I'll just have to follow anything they tell me. But that's not true, because those are individuals who can, and this is very rare, but we have to talk about it, right? You could have an individual whose job, their absolute positively clear duty, right? Their fiduciary duty is to absolutely positively put the needs of the organization first. But it happens where people aren't doing that, where they're stealing, they're manipulating, there's fraud, there's individual greed or other maladaptive behavior that they don't care. They're not putting the organization first. They're putting themselves or some other interest or motivation they have ahead of it. The HR department has to be vigilant for this. So whose side are you on? You're on the side of the organization. The challenge is the organization, of course, can't speak for itself. It only can speak through its agents. And you have to remember, if you're an HR hero and you have any type of time that you've been working, you've seen it, whether it was some organization you were part of or something you studied maybe when you were in school or getting your certification as an HR professional. You realize that a strong organization can withstand even a senior person who was not following either the law and or the human resources policies and procedures, the organizational policies. People come and go. So HR needs to ideally be an institution as part of the organization that's able to withstand. Oh, we lost our senior leader. That's okay. We still have our infrastructure. The organization continues. Human resources is there for my personal opinion, the organization, not just to continue, but to be able to surpass its goals. So this is tough. But the easy part is it takes it away from HR to feel like there is a side at all. There's just one entity they serve, the organization. Now, again, in real life, you'll have people abuse that and come into HR and say, well, I'm the organization. I speak for the organization. Well, at this moment, you're in a job that does, but we've documented why we don't support that and why we are not going to, put on the record that we agree with it. And let the consequences go where they will, but people in HR have to be willing to stand up for what's the right thing. The law will tell you what you have to do. Your policies will tell you what you've decided internally is the rule. And I'm going to argue that you really need to implement and continue, because ethics is a lifelong question. Every day we have new ethical struggles. Not big ones, but just little stuff, right? So what should you do? Go back to the rule and remember the organization is bigger, sometimes literally bigger, but also the legacy of it should be more than just any one person or a couple of people. And that's imperative that you remember that. If you have this type of human resources leadership that understands this and then engages in decision making based on this, then most people at those organizations will share sort of a equal, I'm going to use this word, sort of a grudging respect. So when you have an organization where people really view HR as they're just going to do what the rules say, the law, the policy, or whatever, there's trust. So that makes it a little bit where the employee is like, but they trust that they're going to get a fair opportunity to present what they need to, and that they're going to be respected and listened to, and it'll be investigated. You'll also get, though, employers feeling like, HR. And you'll get senior leadership who hopefully are a little intimidated. That they know I can't just go down there and boss people and tell them to do whatever I want to, even if it's illegal or it's against policies and procedures, or even, people feel that it might be completely unethical. that's what the check and balance is. That's why I said there's grudging, sort of like, oh, they don't just do whatever I want. But there's respect there because people believe in the process, because they believe you're doing the right thing for the organization. You can tell them why. Show them to the law. Here's the law. This is why we said this. Here's your policy and procedure. This is why we said this. Or here's the ethical framework that we use to analyze this issue, and here's our conclusion. Here's why. People feel that you're fair and you're actually treating everybody impartially because you're only looking at what's the best long-term and short-term and medium-range outcome for your organization. Then, like I said, everyone's going to be a little bit, disgruntled because, oh, they don't just do what I want, but they'll respect the process. And that's what human resources, part of what human resources should be doing. So I hope you thought this was at least a thought-provoking show. I really, again, will never be able to express to you the amount of gratitude I have for you being part of the program. And I do encourage you, as always, to come visit CourtneyAnderson.com and see what we're working on, and take part in sharing your opinion, being part of our mailing list, anything that you feel comfortable doing. Thanks again.